heard like a huge splat, and then suddenly like everyone running towards like the person behind me, and it was our friend who twisted her ankle 180 degrees.
Like you think you're invincible, but when things actually happen, that's where you're like, oh no, like you should have forecasted this. A very warm welcome to our live podcast session brought to you by Rice Media and AIA, where we raise the big question: is your generation adept at managing finances? My name is Vanessa Ho, and I'm proud to be your host for today. So Sarah and Aaron Wee are popular content creators and my favorite siblings who have been documenting their journey towards financial freedom.
So we started creating content on TikTok about 2 years ago, towards the end of COVID. That was when we really came up with our goal of $1 million. To be honest, it was because it was a nice number at that point. And a good, like, you know how people talk about your first $10,000 is going to be difficult. And then the next milestone's 100,000, and $1 million sounds like a good milestone for us at this point in our lives.
At which age did you set your mind to achieve this $1 million dream?
We never really put like an age target. I think because for us, it really depends on our risk tolerance at a certain time. And also, the $1 million is more of our investment portfolio. So later, Aaron will share a little bit more about how we actually tweak our investment as like our age has changed. So that's why the time frame of the goal has actually shifted a little bit based off Aaron's new life stage.
Sure, Aaron, tell us more about yourself.
I'm Aaron, and I'm the other half of the Weeblings. I am a bit more passionate about like the investing side and the trading side, so I kind of get a little bit deeper into that. But overall, like the $1 million journey is really focusing on how we can grow our portfolio to $1 million. So it does not include everything that we have as well, because we still need money to live life. Not everything should be just about saving and just putting into investments. We still need to eat, and I'm looking to buy a house soon as well.
Wow, congrats.
Yeah, and it's really, really challenging. The housing market is quite high right now. It's pretty hot.
Surprisingly, when I was posting on LinkedIn and Instagram about this event and to get people to come down, there were people debating in the comment section about renting, because I was talking in the caption about, oh, I like to rent. I want to free up more liquidity for investments, but my parents disagree and frown upon the decision, and they want me to pursue ownership. So I can imagine across different generations, from Gen Zs all the way to our parents' generation, Gen X, they have different view on investments and different asset classes as well, right? So tell us more about what do you think are the biggest financial concerns of the different generations, maybe starting with Gen Zs.
At least for me, number one is, of course, the rising cost of living. But I think it's something that is pretty new for us because everything was kind of stable, like 2% inflation. But suddenly, well, we hit a pandemic. And afterwards, everything just skyrocketed. And I think we're just not used to that pace. But beyond that as well, for me especially, like trying to buy a house, I think that's where you don't really see that in just inflation numbers. You really see it when you're trying to buy a house. What used to be just, oh, I could save up for a year. Now I need 2 years to save up just to afford that place. And it gets really, really challenging, especially if you're someone who is trying to settle down. But also, I'm the older end of all the Gen Zs. So maybe not all of us have reached that stage yet. But when you reach the stage of trying to get a house, it becomes really, really challenging at the moment. And something that I've noticed with my generation as well, work-life balance. I think that's something that a lot of people in my generation are trying to pursue. I have a lot of friends working in the hospitals, and a lot of them are trying to do careers that are pushed towards work-life balance. So instead of working the grueling, long hospital working hours, many of them are trying to move out into something that is more manageable. Just something that I've noticed.
Sarah, as a millennial, what are some of the common challenges that you see among your peers of your age?
I think housing is something that only the younger millennials or millennials that are getting married later are starting to experience, like me. But for most of my peers, they are actually already married and already have a BTO and things like that. So I think that's where the difference lies. I think for people in the millennial age group, because I'm the younger millennial, but a lot of my older millennial friends are dealing with kids and aging parents. So I think struggling to manage their finances together with like a newborn, the expenses that come with a newborn, at the same time managing, aging parents if their parents didn't save it up enough, or if they have health problems now, I think that's a struggle.
And they call it the sandwich generation,
Yes.
right? Especially in families where the parents have one kid, you have one person who has to support both the mom and dad, plus the kids. It's very, very challenging to support both generations at the same time.
Yes, exactly. So some of my friends, they are a single child. They don't have siblings. So
unlike our dearest Weeblings. Okay, you guys are very lucky.
Yes, I guess Aaron, you'll have to back up in a few years when you become the age of millennials.
What about your parents though? They fall in the Gen X category. Do you see a difference with their relationship with money or their financial concerns versus, say, both of you?
I think it's quite hard for us to gauge because we're at a different stage of life. I've never seen my parents before I was born, so I'm not sure how they were like when they were my age. And I think the concerns are very different. I think Singapore has progressed a lot. And worrying about housing like this, I don't think that's what they were more concerned with in the past. From the stories that I've heard, I think it's really just trying to find a job and just provide for the family. Whereas now, I think it's also a little bit spoiled. Like, I want a good place, I want a big place. Because I think me and my fiance, we want to have kids. And so we're trying to plan for that. And sometimes it's also just trying to be a little bit more greedy. Like, we want the perfect house, the perfect timing, and everything to be sorted out before that. But I never heard that coming from my parents. When they had both me and my sister, my dad's just like, I gotta work, just gotta find just enough money to feed us, make sure we have a roof over our head, food to put in our mouth. So I think like the generation has shifted quite a bit.
Aaron obviously doesn't pay a lot of attention when my parents talk to him.
Enlighten us, Sarah.
I think Aaron's right in the sense that back then it was a lot about hustling. So I think back then the problem was there wasn't social media, there wasn't YouTube, there were only like books, I guess, about finance. And if you're not like much of a book person, then you won't be as educated about finance. And there's no financial education in school back then. I mean, now there also isn't financial education in school. But for our parents, I think they weren't educated when it comes to like savings, when it came to investing especially, or even learning about mortgage, where to put their money for the best ROI. So I think they didn't make the best financial decisions and they relied a lot on friends to kind of give them advice, some of which were good, some of which were bad. So I think that's the difference between our generation because we have a lot of information and we can educate ourselves. And I mean, Aaron and I didn't study finance in school, right? So everything that we know, we actually learned from books and mostly online from courses and YouTube videos and stuff like that. So which is something that they didn't have, which I think was a disadvantage. So I think a lot of the Gen X or maybe baby boomers might be a little bit more behind if they didn't study finance in school.
Yeah, I think pros and cons from a Gen Z perspective like myself. We are in an age where you see your friends posting their nice holidays, their new cars on Instagram. You desire a more material lifestyle, and that's me as well. I am also a victim of that where you want to match up to that, right? But something interesting when I was watching a summary video of the psychology of money, wealth is the money that is hidden, that you can't see. It's how much money in your bank account that is not spent yet.
Yes, if you make $1 million and spend $1 million, you're not wealthy.
Yes, exactly. So that was very interesting because I also live a very high life, and the reason why I also work on the weekends and do a lot of side hustle is to achieve and maybe not show off, but just to make myself happy, this high life. So I think the Gen Zs are a lot like that. But at the same time, being a Gen Z means that we're born into an age of information, like what you said, and there are so many new and sophisticated investment products right now that makes investing so much simpler than in the past by the different financial services providers as well.
Exactly, but it can also be a bit confusing, I guess. I think back then we had very little choice. So when I first started investing, I think there were only like, or when Aaron, especially when he was much younger, I think he only had like DBS to invest, DBS Vickers, right? And then now I think the problem is that there are so many and people get confused with the decision that they have to make. Like, decision paralysis.
Really, right now is one of the best time to get started with investing. Just a couple of years ago, like we didn't have so many brokers to choose from. If you wanted to get started, it is with the local banks like DBS, OCBC, UOB. Nothing wrong with them. They are great banks. But the brokerage side is very expensive. And so if you're young, you don't have a lot of capital and you're going to try to invest, you're going to spend a lot on money on fees. And over the years, it's going to add up to thousands of dollars. But nowadays, you can get on a broker and it's sometimes free, sometimes just $1. It's about the market rate right now. So it's really the best time to get started to investing if you are someone young like ourselves.
Over the last few years, what were the major and crucial financial decisions that you have to make for your own personal lives? And were there any mistakes or regrets that you have?
As someone who is really interested in investing and trading, I have a tendency to skew a bit more towards taking riskier investment decisions. But unfortunately, I have to scale back on that because I'm actually looking to buy a house and I need cash for that. And I think one of the mistakes that I've seen people make is they put a lot of their investments into risky assets. And it's great in the long term, it may end up being good for you. But if they wanted to buy the house today, that becomes a challenge because if the market isn't good, they have to sell the assets at a loss to finance the house, to pay for their house. And I didn't want to face that. I needed that stability with me and my fiance. So because of that, I'm forced to scale back and take less risky investment decisions right now.
So in the past, when I guess you were getting started in your investment versus right now, what's like the percentage or allocation in your portfolio that went to riskier assets? For example, like crypto or, more high fluctuation assets.
Yeah, so initially, I would say almost 80 to 90% was in riskier assets. So like you mentioned as well, some of it was in crypto, a lot of it was in equities as well, and a lot of it was in leveraged equities as well. But right now, the majority of it is in bonds and cash-related assets because I really need the cash and I'm not ready to risk that amount. So right now, I've actually shifted all the way back to about 80% on that and 20% on risky assets because I still have a little bit of an itchy finger.
And investing journey should be fun and fulfilling for yourself also.
Yes.
And what about you, Sarah? Were there any financial considerations and big milestones for you the last few years? And what were some of your takeaways from those decisions?
I guess the best decision I made was to start investing. I started a little bit later than Aaron, so he was actually like the person that helped me get started with investing. I read Ramit Sethi's I'll Teach You to Be Rich. And then I was very inspired and I was like, Aaron, you need to teach me how to automate my investments. So I started with very simple investments which is why I didn't have to look at my portfolio a lot. And I think that's the main takeaway I got from how to start investing as someone who is new. You start with something that's more automated, something you don't have to look at too often. And Aaron taught me how to do that. And I think that was the best decision I made. Of course, I wish I started earlier because compared to him, I did start quite late, especially since I'm the older sibling. So that was a bigger regret. I think another important decision I made was to define my financial goal for the next few years. And then that's how we decided on our investment strategy. Right now, my investment strategy is kind of similar to his because we share our portfolio, right? Our $1 million portfolio. So I have also moved out of riskier assets and into stable assets since we share our money now.
Yeah, I think similarly, my investment journey has evolved over time. When I first got started and I knew nothing, I started with investment-linked products with my financial advisors from AIA. And then over time, as I educated myself more and I have more capital to play with, I could go into like buy individual stocks or even angel investing in startups that I was passionate about. So that kind of shifted over time as well when I educated myself. But the bare basics was really like a very mixed and diversified portfolio to start with. Now, tell me more about what were the mistakes then? Because a lot of people share the successes of investments or financial strategies online, but very few people talk about mistakes that they made or regrets. Can you share with us some of those?
I think one of our biggest mistakes was last year. I think it was either last year or 2022. It was during the crypto craze, and one of our biggest losses came from that. We don't really regret it so much because we were safe in our investments, meaning like I think we only had 5 or 10% of our entire portfolio in crypto, so we lost about maybe 5%. But to us, it was a really good learning experience. But we also, during that period, saw a lot of other people that put like 100% of their portfolio in crypto, which was very risky, and it's still very risky. And I think that was a big learning lesson for us. But of course, losing, it still was a big chunk of our money. We lost like everything, right? Because of Luna, if you guys know about that. So that's where we lost our money and what we regret the most. One of our biggest mistakes. Yeah.
And did you have any takeaways from observing your peers, your parents, or other people around you make financial mistakes and you're like, okay, these are the things I should avoid or do better?
Yes. So actually, something happened with our parents, and that was the reason why we started learning about finance and getting ourselves educated on finance so that we can manage our own finances. We're going to let Aaron take the mic and tell you about our parents, otherwise he's not going to speak.
Growing up, our parents had a pretty good friend. I think they listened to the friend and they trusted the friend, but most of the advice given by the friend was actually very bad, and so they lost.
Get rich quick scheme.
Yes, so I think he kind of was selling my parents a get-rich-quick scheme. My parents are not that financially literate. They're not so interested in all of this. So they just trust a friend. A friend says, hey, do this with me. We can make some money. And so, yeah, they put money in. But of course, like most get-rich-quick schemes, it all goes to zero. And so my parents lost quite a bit of money. Not everything, But all the money that they entrust with a friend eventually all disappeared. And so, hearing that story growing up and seeing my parents get very stressed out about it, actually, that's what made me a little bit more interested in it, interested in finance. Like, what's this thing that my parents are so stressed about? They're usually very chill, but something is making them really stressed. And so, I decided to look into it. And I think that's how we really started. It's how I got started as well, learning more about finance.
Yeah, I think there were two very important lessons I learned from just observation. One a positive one and one a negative one. The not so positive one was a neighbor of mine back when I used to live with my parents. They have a kid who's 1 year older than me and got leukemia when he was in secondary one. It was terrible. They were underinsured, and that was when I think my family kind of observed that and gave them some support, but also made sure that we, for rainy days, make sure we avoid that mistake as well. And then the second good influence on me was my dad. When I turned 18, I think besides going straight to Ubi to get my driving license, when I straight away turned 18, my dad dragged me to open a brokerage account, and back then I knew nothing about it. And it was just an empty account. He bought me like my first few stocks, got me started in very like blue chip SGX stocks. But it was like my early phase. And I think back then in my house, next to the fridge, there would be pins of my dad. I don't know why. He printed out the Excel sheets of his portfolio. I'm not sure whether it's a deliberate thing to influence us or was it to actually manage the finances, but it was there next to our fridge, so I saw it all the time. So those were some of the early influences that I have as well. And what about some practical steps and tips to find your personal life journey? You're getting your house, you're getting married, and you have your own milestones as well.
Yes.
When it comes to a big goal, whether it's a big holiday like a graduation trip or your big wedding, what are some tips to work towards this big expense?
I think it's quite intuitive, but also a little bit difficult to stick with. But it's basically budget and track your expenses and save more than you spend, right? So I think everybody knows that. It's just the implementation that is a little bit difficult. And I think some people skew to either extreme. So some people skew to the extreme where they don't bother saving and they just live life like, ooh. But there are some people who also basically budget too much and then they get miserable and burn out. So I think it's important to find a balance, and it's important to also have some fun money in your budgeting just so that it keeps you going for longer.
Sarah, I know you're the queen of tools. You love Notion. Can you share with us some interesting apps or tools that you use to do your budgeting or tracking expenses?
So for tracking expenses, I personally use this app called Notion. It's a productivity / like knowledge management app that is like Legos. So you actually have to build your own system on it, which I find extremely fun. So I built my own tracking system on Notion.
And do you share your templates with your followers?
I have not yet. So
I'm waiting for that.
So that is in the works. I have already built it. I just haven't like refined it. So that's going to be up soon. So you can follow us on TikTok if you would.
And what other tools do you use to track your expenses or your invoices?
Yes. So for me personally, everything is tracked on Notion. But for other people who you don't want to build your own template on Notion, I used to use this app called Spendy. I'm not sure if it's on Android, but I use an iPhone. So it's an app on my phone. But that's also manual tracking of expenses, which I personally recommend because it's a psychological like barrier to spending more. So every time I spend like $100 on dinner or something with my friends, I'm like, when I key in, there's like that pain. Because when you're tapping your card or swiping your card, you don't feel it. But whenever I go back home and I check my credit card statements or I actually key it in, I feel the pain. Okay, tomorrow I'll spend less. Because I realize that if I don't do that, the next day I forget that I just tap my card. I don't even look at the receipt, right? Or sometimes even worse, your friends pay for you and then, the dinner didn't happen. But it did, right? So that's for me, manual tracking is the best. But if you're just getting started, I think to get your foot in the door, you can try things. There's an app called Dobbin. So you can connect your credit cards and bank accounts into the app and it will automatically pull your expenses out. So for that, you really need to set like a time, put it in your calendar, set a timer for like a weekly or monthly checking of your expenses. Otherwise, there's no use tracking it. Yeah.
And how about you, Aaron? What are some of the useful tools or softwares for your investment or trading?
Self-discipline, which I don't have.
That's the hardest piece. We were just discussing this, right? Knowledge is the first step. The second piece is the discipline to carve out time to review your portfolio, to speak to your financial advisors, to track your expenses on a daily habit basis.
Yeah, I agree. I think the good part about me is I'm just a bit more self-disciplined. Maybe I'm not, but compared to Sarah, I am.
So, what are some of the tips and advice that you can give to our audience online and offline here today?
So for me, I also use Notion. I'm a heavy user of Notion. I like it because you can customize it exactly the way that you need. And so I actually track my trades on Notion as well. And so that's where I use to key in my trades. And also there's two portions. There's the investment part and the trading part. So the trading part is all on Notion. And whenever I do a trade or anything, I'll just key in why I did the trade, how I did the trade, and I just key in my thoughts as well. And so that just helps keep me on track and reminds me of what's important, what's not important, and keep me with the pulse of the market. But for investments, it's all just on the platform. So whatever platform I'm using, I'll just look at it and manage it from there. So depends. So for that, I don't really use Notion as much.
I see. For me, I use 3 tools. Seedly, the app, to track my expenses. Time to time, I forget, but it's really good to see where you're spending. Mine is a lot of dining and travel, unfortunately. And then I use this tool called Upplan, which I can put my different life milestones, like I want $1 million house by this age, or a car by this age. And then they tell you, okay, at 75, you run out of money if you continue your current expenses in your financial projections. So it's a really good visual projection tool. Last bit is just a simple Google Sheet to track my insurance, my liquid, my illiquid assets, and the different places where you put money, especially now when there are so many platforms where you can park your money at, so many bank accounts that you might hold, and even like fintech products that you have, right? Like a mobile wallets, for example, you might get confused by where your money is at. Or especially when you have different insurance products, it's easier to track as well. And you can share this with your financial advisor to help you review time to time.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, speaking of insurance, with today's high cost of living and inflation, we just paid for our $8 coffee just now. How much should we prioritize good insurance coverage?
For us personally, of course, we think that health insurance is extremely important. It's a must-have. And we have a story of our friend. So basically, Aaron and I rock climb a lot. We boulder every Thursday, and we have a group of friends that we do it with. I think it was a year or 2 back, and Aaron invited a friend along. So she was kind of new at rock climbing. She climbed the entire day. So there was this one route that she was like working on over and over and over again. I remember I was at another wall, and I heard like a huge splat. And then suddenly, like, everyone running towards, like, the person behind me. And it was our friend who twisted her ankle 180 degrees. So...
Ouch, I feel it already.
Yeah. And it was like, everyone already cleared the gym. Like, it was just our friends because it was literally her last attempt. And she, like, fell and her ankle was twisted 180 degrees. And she was an air stewardess back then and she had a flight the next day. So that's unfortunate. And because it was Aaron's friend, so he was the one that went with her to the hospital. And midway through my dinner, he texted me, "Oh my God, she doesn't have insurance."
No way.
And so that was going to be a huge problem because healthcare is expensive. And I guess when you're young, you would think that I'm not going to be hospitalized. Until today, I haven't been hospitalized yet.
Like, you think you're invincible, but when things actually happen, that's where you're like, oh no, like, you should have forecasted this or prepare for it at least.
Exactly. And you never really know when it's going to happen. Like, nobody expected my friend to fall and break her ankle. And I realized that it's actually important for a young person to get insurance because of that. I cannot imagine being set back 5 figures right now. Again, trying to buy a house, 5 figures is going to be huge. But the cost of insurance at my age is actually quite cheap. So the risk to reward is actually pretty good for what we have right now.
Unlike you, Aaron, I have been to the hospital far too many times, as my dearest insurance agent over there has helped me file a lot of my claims over the last few years. And that's how we also got closer as friends and message each other more every time I have some issues. But I've also recently fractured my ankle like about half a year ago. And you want the best healthcare treatment for yourself, right? And you studied physio. You know that physio is really important and you need multiple sessions afterwards. And thankfully, I got all those covered. Yeah, as a like injury-prone and accident-prone person, I'm just very, very grateful
Yes,
for good coverage.
I've also been to the hospital 2 or 3 times already, mostly like stomach issues.
Oh, we discussed this, that we both have gastritis.
Yes, we both have gastritis. Aaron keeps making fun of me. He keeps saying that I went to the hospital for a stomach ache, okay, but he has never experienced gastritis. He has no idea how painful it is.
Yeah, as creators and we have multiple jobs,
Yes.
it's the irregular diet, occasional
Yes.
drinks, and
Yes.
lifestyle.
And also I had an appendicitis. So, you know, appendicitis can happen to anyone and it's like luck, right? So exactly like he said, you never know when something's going to happen to you. And by the way, both times that I was in the hospital, it was on his birthday. 1 year after the next. I think it is something to do with him.
Secretly poisoning you so you won't be at my birthday.
Aaron, you shared briefly about you getting insured at an earlier age because of a lower premium. When did you get started taking control of your insurance? Did it start from your parents getting you covered? Then you moved it to your own asset to manage?
Thankfully, our parents already got us insured when we were really, really young, so we didn't have to worry about that. And we just took over once we started working as well. But I think it's not just starting like super, super young, but even if you were to start now, it's still going to be pretty low for someone in our age group.
Before I open the floor to questions, we have some questions that was raised on Rise Media's Instagram earlier this week. Now, this one is really interesting. What does it take to be independent and staying on your own while juggling work or studies in your 20s without financial support from your parents?
To be honest, we are still lucky and blessed enough to have financial support from our parents. Of course, we are trying our best to, not take too much money from them. Okay, we're not taking money from them, but we are living in their house rent-free, basically. For now, at least. Next year, it's going to be a different thing because I'm moving out next year. Aaron's getting married next year. So that's going to be a whole new world for us. As Aaron said, I think with this new stage of life that's coming soon, we have been trying to keep our investments in safer places. So just in case we ever need it, we have money to take it from. We are hustling harder than ever these past few years to bring ourselves to a more financially free place. That's why our $1 million goal. And of course, that's not the main goal. We're going to have more goals from there, further milestones. I think the next milestone will probably be 5 million. You heard it here first. But the reason for that number is because of the 4% rule. So with the 4% rule, just a small, quick way for you to figure out what number you need to be financially free. I actually didn't even ask Aaron about it. I just calculated his financially free number for him.
So how does the 4% come about? Can you walk us through for those of us hearing it for the first time?
So the 4% rule is basically, you've saved enough money basically to invest that money, and you will take out 4% every year, and that amount of money that you're investing in the market would be able to keep you alive for the next 30 or more years. So that number for us, when I calculated, would be 100K of expenses. So basically what you do is you take 100K or however much you think you will spend in a year, multiply it by 0.04.
Got it. And how about you?
Divide by 0.04. Divide, not multiply.
Divide by multiplier. Okay.
Divide by 0.04. I was like, okay, if to live kind of comfortably, it'll be 100K a year, which to be honest is more than enough for most people. But for us, I just want to have a bigger, nicer goal. So it's $100,000 per person for a year. And then that was 2.5 million. And then times 2, it's 5 million.
And Aaron, you're a Gen Z. You got independent really quickly. Tell us some of the advice for people who are looking for an independent lifestyle. What would you tell your younger self or even your younger peers?
Don't spend money. Aaron literally doesn't spend any money at all.
How?
Yeah, so when it comes to budgeting and stuff they were talking about, I don't really budget as much as well because I just try my best not to spend money. So I limit by spending to the bare minimum.
It's easy as a guy, don't you think so? Unless you're into watches and cars.
Oh yeah, I know someone who's into watches and cars and all the fancy guy stuff. Yeah, you could run out of money. The shoes, the really fancy shirts, the watches, and all of the little camera gear. Oh, that's it.
Aaron, so one tip that Aaron will probably have, but I'm just saying it for him anyway, is that he, aside from posting on social media, he doesn't use social media. So he doesn't I think Vanessa mentioned...
FOMO.
Yes, no FOMO at all. The only FOMO he has is the new iPhone, so he has to change his iPhone every year.
Oh yeah, so apart from changing my phone every year, I don't use social media that much. I usually go onto it for educational content as well, the content that we create. So maybe I don't get as influenced because I don't even know what's the newest fancy thing. So because of that, I don't spend as much. Yeah, but I think if you save a lot and you find what's comfortable for you, I think if you really figure out what's comfortable for you, even though it sounds like I don't spend a lot, I know people who spend even less than me, but once you figure out what makes you comfortable and you spend to that comfort level, you're happy, then don't overspend. And that way you can save up for your future.
I think I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum compared to Aaron. You're probably maybe middle. I have my fancy spots like scuba diving and golf, stay in a nice house, moved out at 18 and never went back. But then for me, it's what am I spending on that makes me happy versus what can I cut back on? So when I upgraded my place that I'm renting at, I was like, okay, this year I'm going to cut back on my designer bags then. If I choose maybe a place further out in the east, maybe I can rent a car or buy a designer bag every year. But since I decided that, okay, maybe staying somewhere more central gives me the convenience, saves me time, it makes me happier, I'm going to cut back on other things and that's going to balance it out.
Yes. So I think one of the things that I learned from Ramit Sethi is to spend extravagantly on the things that bring you joy and then cut mercilessly on everything else. So of course, if a lot of things bring you joy, you have to pick a few. But it's kind of like the 80-20 rule where you spend on maybe like usually three categories of things. So for me, it will be things like convenience. So I take cabs a lot. Food, because I like socializing, because I'm an extrovert, so my food budget is not for like expensive food, but food that I spend with my friends, and clothes. So those are three things that make me happy, and I spend extravagantly on that, and I try to cut mercilessly on everything else.
I think in that journey to independence, I also realized that I was very laser focused on my active income, like hosting, DJing, all that sort of things when I was like 16 years old onwards. And I started my passive income strategy much, much later when I met my financial advisor, or when my parents told me that I have to like start reviewing my investment strategies and my personal finances. So I think that's one thing that I would probably advise people who are in the journey to independence to start thinking about it a bit earlier, instead of just being swamped with just hustling for trading your hours for income.
Yes, I agree as well, because I think my experience was a little bit more similar to yours. I started work for, I think, a year or two before I started investing. But I think Aaron is the one that started investing before he even got a job. Like, he was investing his allowance or his army salary.
Yeah. So all of it, my allowance, my army salary, I try to save all of it and just chuck it into investments. And like you as well, I was very interested in building the idea of passive income portfolio. And so I really went really deep into that. So I also have a small portfolio on the side that is really dedicated to just that. And I hope that will keep growing in the future as well.
Speaking of regrets, right? I think one of Aaron's regrets is not taking enough risks when he was younger. So even though he started young, he's just an extremely conservative person in general. So even though he was like 18, he's like, no, I cannot take a lot of risks. I need to invest in SGX stock.
Yeah, when I first started, it was a lot of it was just in SGX stock because it was like familiar and it's simple. It took me quite a while before I was able to, I can put a huge sum of my investments into US equities.
But the good thing is you started early. So even though the late for you is early for a lot of people who are probably late in their journey, the late for you, you're still Gen Z, you're still really young. So late for you is still a very good timeline for most people in their investment journeys.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think for me as well, it's like really figuring out what kind of portfolio you want and then building towards it is very important as well. Because again, some people, if you go all in equities, it's perfect for them. They love that risk. But some people, you do need to just get that sense of safety, which is what I needed. So even
he couldn't sleep at night.
Because there's some days when my portfolio wasn't doing very well, and then mentally it's a bit challenging. I was like, I can't sleep. What I should have done something else. What if I hedged right now? What if I just protect my downside left, right, and I couldn't sleep because of it? And so I realized that, hey, that's not very good for my mental health. So I decided to, why don't I just take a more conservative approach to some of my equities, remove my leverage. It's okay to make a little bit less, remove the leverage so you don't have to worry about getting margin called. And then, everything became a lot smoother after that.
So thank you for spending time with us, and we'll see you at the next event. Thank you.
Thank you.